Hey everybody, so I'm back to talk about another comic, and this time we're going to be talking about Dennis O'Neil's Iron Man. And now I'm reading it from the Iron Man Epic Collection, The Enemy Within, which collects issues 158 to 177 along with Annual 5. In that set, there are two issues that are not written by O'Neill. One of them is 159, and the other is the Annual. Both are largely inconsequential. The only real highlight to even reading the Annual is that Black Panther's in it, and Black Panther is handled really well, and it's got some really great dynamic art, so that's a fun story, if nothing else. And then going in and reading 159, which again is not done by Dennis O'Neill, it has fantastic artwork all the way through. So it's a very great looking story, and it's a very simple story. There's a tiny consequence for if you were reading along with something like Doctor Strange or Fantastic Four, but just as part of Dennis O'Neill's Iron Man, it doesn't mean much at all. Again, neither of those are bad stories. They just don't matter to the scope of what we're talking about. So Dennis O'Neill took over Iron Man right after McLeany and Layton left. They had a run from 115 to 157. And at the end of their run, Tony had falling out with his girlfriend. That wasn't really a falling out. It was more of just like a mutual breakup that left him kind of depressed. More so just kind of reigniting his old habits and testing the limit of the fact that he no longer requires alcohol. So it's more of putting Tony back in a regular status quo, just getting rid of the drinking. And so when you get into Dennis O'Neill stuff, you start from a place that's a little darker than you would expect, because the Tony that we see at the end of McLeany Layton's run versus this one is a little bit jarring. And it's not huge. It's not like a massive problem or anything. It's just the first issue opens with Tony as this physically exhausted person who can't seem to keep going as Iron Man, Tony Stark, and then this outward party person and businessman that he's supposed to be constantly. And you could sort of infer that he's been going around without Beth and sort of exhausting himself through that angle, and maybe that's why he's like that. But just reading 157 to 158 back to back, it feels a little strange. It feels like no time has passed. So I'm not sure if that reason really works. Regardless, this run is absolutely fantastic. O'Neill goes from 158 all the way to 208. So it's a 50-issue run, and this is only the first half of it. But it's incredibly well handled. It's one of the best comics I've ever read. O'Neill goes back to the alcoholism, and part of what it is that it's not as simple as Tony picking up a drink. It's not as simple as someone putting temptation and him giving in. It's also not as simple as he's acknowledging that he's an alcoholic, and we just do the whole depression, alcoholism, back to being a healthy person story. It's much more long form than that. Essentially, what the story does is it introduces Obadiah Stane, and it works from this angle of Obadiah Stane wants to take over Stark International, not because he necessarily has something against Tony, at least not from what this wave of issues has reasoned with us. From this angle, it's not that he has anything against Tony personally, it's that he's trying to get a group of corporations together to form a pack and essentially just get kind of a monopoly going. And of course, antitrust legislation and such prevents that, so they do it behind everyone's knowledge, and they're trying to pull Tony into it because he's the last outlier, and Tony wants no part of it. So Stane decides to send his chess pieces because he's the chess prodigy, so he his whole plan is shaped like a chess game with Tony Stark. So he sends his knight, he sends his rook, he sends his bishop, all to kind of wear Tony down. He even sends his queen, and the queen I'll get to later, because that's an interesting element. So essentially, for the first 10 issues, it's just Tony going through and battling these guys. But behind all that action is Tony getting more and more exhausted, and Tony's company getting in worse and worse shape, because they're the only ones that are not taking part in this trust. So you get that very easy economic legislation of, well, if those other corporations are smaller, then they could potentially cut prices, and so they can force people who don't want to work with them, and that's how a lot of those trust legislations work, is where you get the firm with the lowest average long run average cost to be in charge. And they don't necessarily spell any of that out here, but you can see that that's kind of what they're doing. That's kind of the business strategy, along with just being a supervillain plan of, hey, let's keep breaking down Stark International, so they have to keep rebuilding it. And that's kind of what happens for the first couple issues when we first learn about Stane. Stark's penthouse office, which was annihilated by Blacklash in Miscellaneous Layton's run, is rebuilt here, and then it's broken again, and then they have to keep rebuilding it, and then they get to this point where they say, you don't have the money to keep repairing this, we can't afford to do it, it might be easier to just buy a new building or something like that. So Tony's business life is kind of falling apart, while simultaneously he's trying to deal with Stane and these other companies. So while he's doing that, and while he's kind of exhausted from that, he meets a girl who was injured in one of the attacks on Stark International, and he becomes infatuated with her after she gets injured, and he feels like it's his responsibility to help her, which he does to the best of his ability, but he gets kind of obsessive over her. He keeps wanting to see her, and he's got this love affair with her. So he's in love with her, and at that point, she gets kidnapped along with Rhodey getting poisoned. So you've got this building status for Tony where his company is constantly having to funnel money into repairing itself because people keep attacking it. Stane is trying to form a trust and take down Stark International. Rhodey, who was poisoned, then leaves the hospital. No one knows where he is. He's completely gone. He has no one like Beth to help him pull through this. And then on top of that, he's infatuated with this new woman who then tells him, and this is sort of the breaking point for him, who then tells him that she was just using him for his money and that he is a worthless person. Now, one of the big defining moments of Miscellaneous Layton's run near the end of it for Tony was that he no longer resents people when he's left alone, that he can deal with just being by himself. And that breaks down here because he's got no one to talk to about everything that's been going on in his life. So he just keeps internalizing a lot of this. He keeps bringing back that resentment. So when this woman tells him that he's a complete mess of a man that no one could ever love and is completely worthless and just destroys him, he gets back to his office and he finds that someone's placed a bottle of alcohol there. And something else I forgot to mention is that throughout these issues, Tony keeps contemplating whether or not he should be drinking, and he thinks about the fact that alcohol would make this so much easier, and it gets kind of cartoony to a point because after the whole fiasco with Rhodey getting poisoned and disappearing from the hospital, Tony decides to try and fly back to America because he can't get anything done in Scotland where he is. So he tries to pull out his pilot's license and says, let me just fly back. And they said, nope, it's expired. So they book a commercial flight. And they get the commercial flight and says, sorry, last one of the day, there's going to be a 4-hour delay from takeoff. Then when he gets on the plane, some stewardess spills 6 glasses of martinis on him. So he's just laying there with the smell of alcohol. And then the pilot comes on and says, hey, there'll be no food on this trip because of some issue. All your luggage got shipped to Saudi Arabia, and we're experiencing some bad weather. So it's quite possibly the worst flight you could ever go on, and it gets really cartoony in that way. That's one thing about this run, and one thing that might put people off, because it is an early 80s, late 70s, in that vein. These issues in particular were published between 82 and 83, but they very much got the tone of the Michelini-Leighton stuff, which was late 70s. So it's got a campier feel to it, and you get instances like that. You get goofier costumes, especially when you go later down the run, and Tony gets this really, really goofy costume that we will touch on then when we get to that part. So you have to kind of expect some of that cartooniness, but even so, you see how he's just kind of being constantly tempted. His days are not going well. He's just not equipped to handle any of this. So he gets that final drink, or he gets that drink in his room, and he gets a final straw, which is the woman who tells him he's worthless, and you find out that she's actually the queen, and she's got this power to entrance men, and so that's why his psychology broke. And it's not that she manipulated, or that it's not that she mind controlled him into wanting to drink. It's that she dug and found that Tony wanted to drink the whole time, and she just broke him to the point where that's the only part of the person that remained. So that was his only excuse. She can't do anything that people don't naturally want to do, so she just capitalizes on that. So Tony has that drink, and it's one of the saddest issues I have ever read, because the initial run is so much about how Tony's trying to be a better person, and none of this is Tony's fault, but things keep building, and he can't just be a regular superhero. And he's got all these pressures mounting, and he doesn't know how to deal with them. So he has that drink, and in his drunk rampage, he blows a contract for Stark International. They lose a bunch of money. Long story short, Stane takes over Stark International, and for the remainder of the run, for the last at least 10 issues of this collection, and pretty much up until issue 200 of O'Neill's run, Tony is a drunk homeless man just living on the street, and the only thing he wakes up for in the morning is the next drink of booze. He's completely lost it. He's completely gone, and Rhodey takes over as being Iron Man. And he doesn't find out in the way that Tony tells him. It's that Tony follows Iron Man around, and Iron Man acknowledges that he doesn't know what to do, and he takes Rhodey's help, and Rhodey decides that he's going to put on the armor to stop an impending attack, and Tony's in no condition to put on the suit. So for the rest of this epic collection, and then for most of what we get next, Rhodey's Iron Man. And Tony becomes a guest star in his own book. It gets to this point where when Tony Stark shows up in an issue, the cover will say guest starring Captain America, and then it'll say guest starring Tony Stark. It's kind of sad. His life just falls so far, and I think that's what I really love about this. This is an extremely experimental thing to do in comics, because how many times do you see your main character who's not dead or off on some other universe event or adventure or anything, but your main character that you are allowed to take to a place where they become simply a guest character within their own book? This is not like Green Arrow dying and Connor Hawke taking over. This is not like Bruce Wayne dying and Dick Grayson taking over. This isn't even like Captain America becoming Nomad. This is Tony Stark still around. His choices lead him to screw up, and now he's not only no longer fit to be Iron Man, he's no longer fit to be the main character of the Iron Man book, and so Rhodey has to take that on, and Rhodey becomes Iron Man. So much so that the opening narrations to issues changes from brilliant industrialist Tony Stark to ace pilot Jim Rhodes, and that's really interesting. It's a run that kind of blindsides you, because you don't expect Stark to play such a minimal role going forward. you certainly know what's coming. You know that this run is building to the alcoholism, and that Tony's going to get hit worse, far worse than he did in Demon in a Bottle. Which, by the way, I like Demon in a Bottle a lot. I think it's a really good story, but man, O'Neill's run just blows it out of the water. So you're expecting this. You're expecting Tony to be hit on really hard times because that's just the nature of Iron Man. But then you see the fact that Tony's barely in any issues. If he's in an issue, it might only be for a couple panels, and you get these pathetic images of Tony just laying there and sleeping in a cardboard box, and having nothing to live for. This homeless man telling him that you have to find something to protect, even if it's old or new. You have to find your own turf, and Tony just can't even motivate himself to go further than that. The book even ends with this really desperate point where a doctor tells him that all your organs are going to shut down if you keep drinking. You've got to do something, and Tony doesn't have an answer for it. It's really fascinating, and I think reading up to this point, Iron Man has cemented himself as one of my all-time favorite characters. He's just so fascinating on so many levels, and it's not just because we're sitting here talking about how his life screws up, and the interesting thing about Marvel characters is their lives suck. It's not that at all. It's this notion that Iron Man is a combination of both Daredevil and Batman. The book opens with Tony talking about this multiple identity mask theme of he's got all these masks. He's Iron Man, he's Tony Stark the philanthropist, he's Tony Stark the businessman, he's Tony Stark the playboy, and it's really exhausting to him. But it works so much more than it does with Batman. Not that it doesn't work with Batman, but Batman's got like this artificial creation. You can't necessarily relate to Batman's split personas because, at least from what I understand of my audience, I doubt too many of them are going out dressed as vigilantes and creating a different psychological persona. Tony's is so much more relatable. Tony's is a split psychology before he ever becomes a superhero, before anything dramatic even happens to him. His splits, his psychological splits, are these very natural, very human. If I'm with my dad, I'm with my mom, I'm with my friends, I'm at work, I have these different angles that I play. And Tony just exaggerates that, and it gets really fragile because he's got an addictive personality. So he gets this, he gets tired from trying to juggle all these lives, but then at the same time, he really hates the people for not only making him do it, which they don't really. He kind of brings it on himself, but he hates people for making them do it, and then he hates people for leaving him alone. So it forces him to kind of break mentally, and a lot of that feeds into the alcoholism of, even if he sobers up, what is he going to go back to? Why would he want to torture himself with being Iron Man and running a company? What's the incentive to go back to being this multi-identity person? Aside from just the pain and the anguish of it, what's his purpose for it? Life right now for him is so much simpler. All he has to do is drink, and there's nothing to pretend about. And it's so much easier for him, and it's really sad that he lost his way so much, but you can still feel for him because of there are these gigantic hurdles, these very human hurdles of friendship and money and figuring out who you are, and then just losing it, and what we do without that. Tony really is the perfect representation of this a very human and personal price for amassing so much wealth, because a lot of these problems that he gets do naturally come from the fact that he's so rich. So he's got to manage his company, but because he's got this almost Batman sense of, I am rich, I am wealthy, I must use this advantage to help create advantages for other people, i.e. be a defender or be a bodyguard for them. He since he's got that personality type, he funnels all of his efforts into being Iron Man. But because he's got such a fragile psychology, like everything else, he overcompensates for it, and he tries too hard. He's got the same sense of distributive justice, but he gets so intimately involved with every little person that when any little circumstance changes, it's more dramatic for him than it needs to be. In a lot of ways, he's a guy that has got the maturity of a teenager. And I'm not saying that as an insult. I'm just saying that as he strikes me as a guy that never really found himself. Or if he did, was never allowed to be himself, and he doesn't really know who that is yet. Again, Batman's got just as much of a fascinating broken psychology, and that's great to study. But I just mean, as a comparative exercise, the exaggerated version that Iron Man has is so easily to find examples of in your own life. And it really makes the alcoholism thing hit so much harder than it did with the Michelangelo Layton stuff. Because, yeah, they defined Tony Stark, and they created the foundation for why Dennis O'Neil is able to do this. But Dennis O'Neil is building on that foundation exceptionally. So he's got that. He's also got the Daredevil thing of his life is just perpetually terrible. But then what really makes this character so interesting is that you get this very simple message of life is about you screwing up, and you'll always screw up, but you have to keep going and value what really matters in spite of these situations. And Tony hasn't figured that out yet, but naturally that would kind of be the arc of he's an alcoholic, but someone like Jim Rhodes comes in and says, you have to realize that it's not about how you feel about other people. It's about this mutual service to humanity, which is really, really interesting. I think I might have gone on a little bit too long talking about all this, but there's just so much interesting stuff going on. Obadiah Stane hasn't really gotten much development yet. He's just sort of the typical bad guy. But he is still very much interesting as a force of business nature. That might sound a little bit strange, but I just mean he's kind of everything we think of when we think about robber baron capitalists and big business. And every time someone ever tells you anything politically charged about corporations, it's personified perfectly by Obadiah Stane. And to make sure it's not too one-sided, anything anyone ever tells you about the good and the helpfulness and the advantages of big business is personified in Tony Stark. But very clearly, this is a story where those cons far outweigh the pros, and we are doing the Frank Miller thing of we're breaking this good person down and waiting for the real hero to emerge. I wouldn't be surprised if a story like Batman or a story like Daredevil Born Again wasn't heavily inspired by Dennis O'Neil's run on Iron Man. Because for those that don't know, when Frank Miller was a kid, he loved Dennis O'Neil's run on Batman. So much so that he would track him down and ask him questions about it, but not like story questions of will the Joker ever show up or stuff like that, like deeper issue-related questions. And it really sparked his critical thinking when he was younger. And so when he got his big break at Marvel, around the same time Dennis O'Neil would be wrapping up his Iron Man run, it seems like there would be a lot of influence for him to push Daredevil to the same kind of broken place and rebuild him the way O'Neil did. And you can see a lot of parallels between what O'Neil's doing here with Iron Man and what Miller ultimately did with Batman. But I think that's just an interesting exercise of, we credit Frank Miller a lot for making Batman dark again, or making Daredevil this definitive character. But a lot of what Miller did traces back to O'Neil, not even in Batman, but also when Miller did Daredevil. And Dennis O'Neil actually did have a run on Daredevil, which is not that great, surprisingly enough. But the fact that we can trace most of Miller's success back to O'Neil just as a major influence, I think is legitimately interesting, considering how polar opposite their styles seem to be. At least when Miller's style matured more, and we got stuff like Sin City. So yeah, I am highly, highly recommending this. Again, this has been issues 158 to 177, and it's all collected in the Marvel Epic Collection, Iron Man, The Enemy Within. And this is only about half of O'Neil's run. The other half would be 178 to 208, which has not been put out in trade as of this recording. The only trade you can get that captures any of that is the Ironmonger trade, which collects 193 to 200, which is the end of the run. But yeah, I am definitely recommending going out and buying this. This is absolutely fantastic stuff. If you don't read any Iron Man ever, I think this should be sufficient. If you don't care about Fraction, if you don't care about Kaminsky, you don't care about Busick, you don't care about Byrne, you don't care about Michelini Layton, if you don't care about any of the creators in Iron Man's history, or you don't even care about finishing this run, at least pick up this collection of issues, because Iron Man's not going to be for everyone. He can be at times a little bit boring because it's not Robert Downey Jr.'s version. It's a much more manic depressant version. It's that Robert Downey Jr. does what Iron Man does in the films, but the portrayal is different because Downey's coping mechanism is humor, and in this, Tony doesn't really have one. So it gets a little bit more serious than that. So it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but if you were even the least bit curious about Iron Man or trying to figure out why people love the character, or even build that love yourself, which is what I was trying to do, this will do it for you. This will definitely do it for you, especially since the Michelini Layton Omnibus is much pricier and may not still be in print, because that's a great place to go as well. That would actually be my number one place to go if you want to really get into Iron Man's history. But this seems like the most accessible and affordable option. So, yeah, at least try this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Really curious to know if anyone's read this run, or if they were even encouraged to read the run because of this review, or if they disagree with me and have anything else to point out, because I know there were a few Iron Man fans that talked to me on Twitter and Facebook and such, which, by the way, you can also follow me on Facebook, and the link for that will be in the description, and as well will be the links to my previous Iron Man reviews of the Michelini Layton run leading up to this. So thanks everybody for watching, and I will see you next time.